In this video, I want to talk about reactivity, and I want to talk precisely about the mechanism that Vue uses to keep the HTML in sync with the JavaScript, and more particularly, how to debug when things don't work in that mechanism, when you see changes in the JavaScript that are not reflected in the HTML, or perhaps vice versa. So here is a very simple app I built. When you load it, you have 3 unhappy faces, and if you click on each one of them, you can toggle the happiness status. You can also click on plus, in which case you get a newborn which is initially unhappy, like real newborns. And if you click on it, you can toggle the status. So that's very good. Let's look at how this is implemented. So let's keep these aside so I can show you the template initially. So this is a template. Let me shrink a bit so you can keep the correspondence. So I have a div with a Vue for R in rows. This is what generates these various faces. Each one of these divs is of class box to give it this bit of shading. And inside the box there is a button. The button has a click listener that calls toggle happy, and it passes it to the index of the row on which you clicked, so that I can tell you on which faces you clicked. And then inside there is an icon which is of class fa2x, which means, you know, a big icon. And the class is fa_smile_o if r.happy and fa_frown_o if not r.happy. This colon class, as usual, means that this class attribute is being driven by the JavaScript value of r.happy via Vue. And at the bottom there is this plus button that is a very simple button with a click listener called add, okay, and is of class fa+. So the view is quite simple. The HTML is quite simple. And now the issue is how is the index. The index is also simple, actually. We have a Vue controller that has only rows as data. There is a classical method enumerate, which just adds the underscore index to every element. Then there is the add happiness function that takes a row and adds the happy attribute, initially false. Okay. Then there is a toggle happy function that takes the index of the row, and what does it do? It fishes out the correct row according to the index, and it toggles the value of the happiness flag. Okay, so then there is an add function. The add function essentially builds a new row and adds it. So it creates an empty row, then it adds a .happy. It adds an ._index, which is set to the length of the current vector, so that, you know, in the current vector they will have indices from 0 to length -1, so the new one I put it at length, and then I insert this new row at the end, right, via the push operator. So the add function is quite simple as well. It just generates a row, adds the correct attributes, and puts it at the end of the vector. The methods are add and toggle happy, I already mentioned it, and the initializer is also quite simple. It builds a list of 3 rows, initially they are empty objects, and then it first adds the underscore index, and then it adds the happiness, and then sets it. So everything is very simple and traditional. And everything works well when it works. And so the problem is now, what happens when it doesn't work? How do we actually debug it? So what I will be doing now is introducing subtle errors of various kinds that have to do with reactivity, and I will show you how to debug them. So this is my first artificial bug. So I can reload. I can click, and darn, nothing happens. So why doesn't anything happen? This is very disconcerting. So let's bring up the inspector. I can look at the console. I need to check okay, no errors. So that's the first thing you check. And then I can perhaps type app Vue rows. Okay, oh, this is an array of 3. And they contain all 3 happy false. Well, let me click on the first one I clicked. Let's see now, app Vue rows, Okay, and if I visualize it, true, false, false. So why on earth, if these are true, false, false, don't I see a smile here? And to add to the disconcert, I can also do here in a toggle happy, I can also say console log and say row index is now, and I can say r.happy, right? So I log the status essentially. And if I do this, I can reload this code. Okay, keep an eye on the console. Sorry, I'll try to show it at the same time. Okay. So this is the console. And now when I go here and I click, I see that the toggling happens, but why don't I see a face? Well, how can I figure out that something is wrong with the reactivity? One trick is this. So you say app view rows. And now let's look at it in a little bit more detail, okay? So let's expand the object 0. Okay, you see the underscore index has a value if I click on it, but it has a getter and a setter. This getter and setter are actually the Vue spies, I imagine them, the Vue sentinels, if you will, that detect changes in the values and signal them to Vue so that when underscore IDX changes, Vue can be alerted and it can bring up to date also the HTML. The problem is this, that I don't see get and set from instead happy. So happy doesn't seem to be a reactive element. The value toggles just fine, but it has no influence on the UI because Vue never knows the value changes. How is this possible? Why doesn't Vue know? Let me look at the code. I made a very small change compared to the previous code. So where is that I created this .happy? You see, now I changed the code a little bit. I created the rows as empty objects, I enumerate them, I set them to Vue, and then I add happiness. So the order of these two lines has been switched. And the problem is this: when you create a new attribute and you add it to Vue, to a Vue observed object, Vue doesn't know that you created a new attribute. There is creating a new attribute of an object, assigning a value to an attribute of an object is such an elementary operation in JavaScript that Vue does not have a way to actually observe it. And so it goes below the Vue radar screen, and Vue is not able to add the sentinels that enable it to observe the change. That is the problem. So if I undo this change, if I switch the order, and this I called it just on rows, okay? So this I bring it back to the original condition, and the problem will be fixed. Let's see whether it's really fixed. So I reload, okay? Now reactivity is back here, and if you look in the console, app Vue rows, okay? And if you look at it carefully, now there are getters and setters also for happy. Notice another thing, that if you go in the Vue debugger and you click on root, you do not see those getters and setters. So in this case, all you see, if you do that in order to debug, okay, so let me do it this way, is that, wait, where did it end up? Okay, here. Is that the code works. You see, when I toggle these, this thing here changes. So you can see that it works. If I break it again, let me break it again a moment. Okay, so this was the broken state. If I break it again, the Vue inspector doesn't actually tell me what is going on. Okay, and all I can see is that. So essentially, the Vue inspector tells you not the truth about the attributes, but what Vue believes it is the truth. So if you use the Vue inspector, you can detect a lack of reactivity because you see no change. Whereas in the console, you could see the change. You see, it's changing. So this is another way. But remember, the Vue inspector can lie about the true state of objects. It tells you what Wu thinks, not what the truth is. Okay, great. So let me now introduce some other problem. So here is my code again. I can refresh it. Okay, I can observe it. I can look at the state here if I like. And let's play with it a moment. So, okay, this seems to work. Let's add a new face. Okay, and now, what is happening? Why can I click on this one, but I can't click on this one? Maybe, let's see if the Wu inspector tells me something, okay? So this is element 2, and this is a new element. It looks just fine. Let me toggle the element 3, index 2. Yes, this toggles fine. Let me toggle 3. Oh darn, 3 doesn't work. 3 is the new one I added. Why doesn't it work? This is just crazy. So let me look at the console, and I say app Wu rows. Okay, it's an array now. I have 4 elements. What's wrong about it? What's the second element has getters and setters for both underscore index and happy. The third element, wait, it has only getters and setters for underscore index. Why? What did I do wrong? And then I look at the code, and I see that what I did wrong is that when I initialize a new row, I set its index, but I don't initialize happy. So what happens is not so much that happy doesn't work. It will work, because when I will arrive at the toggle happy method, initially happy will be undefined, but the first time I call these, it will be r.happy is equal to not undefined, and this will have value true. And from then on it will toggle normally. So yes, it's a bit ugly that initially is undefined instead of false, but the problem is not really that r.happy will never exist. The problem is that it doesn't exist in the row before you add the row to the array. The array can observe the push operation, so it can annotate new things. But it cannot figure out that this new row does not have a happiness attribute. So if you fix it by saying new row.happy is equal to true or false, actually, as it was before, this will fix the problem. And I can add a new row, and now the new row can also be toggled. So here is another example of a problem. So let me keep an eye on the Wu component. So there is the first and the second element. So I can here click on the faces, and nothing changes, and also nothing changes here. So we know that we have to look at maybe a problem with the reactivity in the happy thing, right? So let's look at whether happy is reactive. I can go in the console, and I can say app Wu rows. So app Wu rows is this thing here. I look at it. It seems index and happy are reactive actually. Okay, so they seem to be reactive, and yet there is this very strange phenomenon that when I go here, I don't see any change, and when I click here, I don't see any change either. So what is happening? Let's look at what the console tells us. I can go in the console and look at the, for example, app Wu rows. Let's look at the 0th element. Okay, and this is this complicated object in which happy is true. Now I can click on it once. Okay, and I can look at it again. In this way, I just fish it out again, and I can look at it and see that happy is now false. So actually, if you look at it, you are toggling the value of happy. Happy is reactive, and yet there are two problems. So the major one is that nothing happens, and the other funny thing is that here, this is somewhat oblivious to the fact that I'm clicking. So there are these two problems. where do they come from? And this is a difficult error to debug, because the thing is reactive and yet nothing happens. Why? And the problem is actually this. I used here for the class r.isHappy instead of r.happy. And so this does not generate an error because the variable r is bound by this loop, and rows is bound. So there is no error such as, Vue does not contain a declaration of this, and yet nothing happens. So sometimes you have to look carefully with the sharp eyes, and I don't have a really better suggestion, the name of the attributes you are using in the view, because if here in the template you use an attribute with a wrong name, you will get a null value out of it, but you won't get an error. Okay, so if I fix it again, this will begin again to work. Hopefully, but yes, it does. Okay. So let me give you yet another example of trouble. We can reload these, okay, and I can check reactivity in advance because I want to know whether I have implemented it right. App_Vue rows. App_Vue rows is an array. Okay, fine, let's look at it. Okay, I seem to have all the right getters and setters, so index and happy are reactive, right? So this should also work. So let me try it out, and I click and nothing happens. So what is the matter? Let me look at it again, and well, it's supposed to be reactive. So what is going on exactly? Well, maybe if you are careful enough now, you would come to your mind to also check the first element, not only the zeroth. And strangely enough, the first element lost reactivity. So what is going on? What did we do in the code? Why does, look at it, why at the beginning, if I look at the rows, I can see that 0 is reactive and also row 1 is reactive. Okay, and then I click on row 1, and if I examine the situation again, I will notice that now row 1 is no longer reactive. So what is going on here? Well, the problem is that I changed the code a little bit, and I wrote this. For toggle happy, I do the following. I create a new row, then I set it appropriately. I say the happy is equal to not row happy, so this does the toggling. The index is equal to the old index, and then I put my row inside the right place. Look at it. Look at the add function. I create a new row, just like here. I set it up, and then I push it, and this works. So since this works, why shouldn't this work? Why shouldn't this assignment work? So the problem is that Vue, as you can read in the documentation, does not recognize two things for reactivity. One is assigning to new attributes that don't exist, and the other one, which is somewhat related in fact in the internal JavaScript implementation, is assigning to array elements. So you cannot do this. Now, this is the list of things that don't work. Now I can tell you, what is a solution. If you want to write assignment to array elements and you still want this to work, what you can do is that you can use Vue.set. Vue.set takes the object as the first argument, up to Vue rows in this case, then it takes the index, and then it takes the new element. So if I wrote it in this way, it should work. Let me try. So if I refresh now, I should be able to... oops, VueSet is not a function. But it should be a function. Perhaps I should say VueSet. So always keep an eye on the console. Yes. And so this works. And this also explains how I can write code even for the attribute assignment. So we have seen in the long past that this works, but if I reverse the order of these two, and here I say app Vue rows, okay, that this doesn't work. The happiness is not reactive. Let's give it a try and we shall see that the well, it still is. Yes, it still is because of the way there is a Vue set here. So it becomes reactive when I do this, okay? But I wanted to tell you that the other way of doing this is that also in add happiness, instead of saying r.happy is equal to false and trust that r.happy either already exists or has not been passed to Vue yet, perhaps a safer way would be to write Vue.set of r, the attribute is going to be called happy, and the new value is going to be false. So essentially Vue set is a safe way to do assignments to either attributes or array elements. So let's give it a try. And this works. So remember, essentially you can check always reactivity by looking in the console for the getters and setters. You can use Vue set to explicitly cause elements to be reactive, of course, given that R is already among the reactive things, among the things that are observed by Vue. Otherwise, assignments to new attributes and assignments to array elements are not necessarily reactive. Thank you.